Welcome back to the, I don't know what number we're on, six, seven round of me going through the challenges in my book, The C Sharp Player's Guide. Today we're going to be switching gears a little bit and we're going to be continuing the boss battle that is called the Catacombs of the class. But while we went through these first five challenges before that ask us to design a specific class, design and build it out and write enough code to kind of prove that it's working, possibly with an enumeration or two to support it. Today we're going to be looking at some bigger challenges, namely rock, paper, scissors, 15 puzzle, and hangman. And these challenges don't require us to, I'm going to actually just jump over here right now. So I'm going to click on rock, paper, scissors here. The important thing here, and it says it several places, you do not need to make the full game. We're not going to build out all of rock, paper, scissors, though you could if you wanted to. And again, here, you do not need to create this full game, just come up with a potential design as a starting point. So while the first five challenges in this boss battle were about, let's get hands-on practical experience with like building out a class that does something non-trivial, these five are going to be about starting to think through, like, how would we go about if I did have to make something kind of big, like rock, paper, scissors, like this 15 puzzle game, like hangman, how would we go about organizing our code? That's the part that is sometimes called object-oriented design. And the truth of it is, this book is not an object-oriented design or a software design book specifically. And so the amount of content in the book that's specific to design is relatively lightweight. And anyway, so this is just I'm expecting this is going to be a lot of people's first real exposure to, oh, I ended up with something kind of non-trivial. Like, there's quite a bit going on in this. Like, and even though we think of games like rock, paper, scissors, 15 puzzle, and hangman as small, simple games, when you're forced to build the whole thing in code, when you're forced to teach a computer how to play the game, how to run the game, suddenly you realize there's a lot of nuance and detail to it. So the one thing I do want to say is if you this doesn't just come obvious to you, you're in good company. Again, if we went back and looked at the first time I ever tried to do something like a rock, paper, scissors or a 15 puzzle, I think you'd see how horrible of a disaster mine was. The biggest mistake people tend to make at this point is not using enough objects, not using enough classes, to just kind of, you make one or two little kind of ancillary classes and then write the bulk of the code in like just your main method. That's not actually that big of a deal. Like, it does take some time to kind of start to think in objects, to see the world, to see the code in terms of objects. And along those lines, like, if you ask 10 programmers to go write a loop that counts from 1 to 10, most of the code is going to look very, very similar. Like, that count 1 to 10 is probably a for loop. Maybe it's a while loop. Like, you could have a choice there, but you've got a variable, you increment it, you do console.writeLine. Like, in terms of like structuring code, it's all pretty easy. But when it comes to, structuring like procedural code like that, it's all pretty straightforward. When it comes to design, you get some wildly different answers. As they say, ask ask five different software engineers to come up with a design for these things, and you'll get six different answers. So again, don't expect your answers to look exactly like mine, because they probably won't. And different doesn't mean wrong. I do have quite a bit of experience and exposure to this, so there might, when you look at my solution and compare it to yours, uh, look at it and think like conscientiously, like, do I like that part of this design or do I not? If you do like it, maybe incorporate it into your next design. If there's something about it that you thought would work really well, then just remember it for the next time. But expect it to be different, and different does not mean wrong. With all those caveats aside, let's sort of dive in here. Now, I will say that for something like rock, paper, scissors, I honestly probably would not do much in the way of like design outside of just starting to write code. In my mind, this is a small enough challenge that I myself probably wouldn't spend a ton of time doing it. I would do it kind of in my head as I go. I obviously don't want to just jump to the end conclusion here, especially because there is no end conclusion. We don't actually have to make this game. And the other thing I will say is my typical workflow is actually usually just kind of, I've got a whiteboard on my wall, and I've got a like a 2 foot by 3 foot plexiglass thing that I can write on my desktop, and I've got paper. Like I usually sketch stuff out on paper and not use these physical cards. However, I think they're a pretty easy way to organize stuff in your head and to change things around. And the other thing is I don't have I don't have a camera I can just point at my whiteboard and just describe. So the best that I can do, and it also aligns with the suggestion of using CRC cards, is I can use basically the same tools that I use to make the CRC cards in the book, and that is I'm going to use Adobe Illustrator to sort of do this. Now, I wouldn't normally recommend using Adobe Illustrator to do your CRC cards. I think physical cards, I really do think physical cards are the best option. There are online tools for CRC cards, but like I said, I honestly, there are people who have used it and it's worked well for them, so go for that if that's what you want to do. Most people will seem to either use the physical, like I use the physical cards, or just start like sketching out what you would do on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper. And any of those approaches are fine. There's nothing about this challenge that demands CRC cards. It just suggests it as an option. All right, so rock, paper, scissors is the simplest one that we've got, and we're going to start there. It's the first one. I'm going to move this off screen so you guys aren't going to be able to see it, but just to kind of run through it. So 2 human players compete against each other. Each player picks rock, paper, or scissors. So there's kind of a player selection thing here. Depending on the player's choices, a winner's determined. We already know the rules of rock, paper, scissors, so I'm going to not do anything there. The game must display who won the round. The game must keep running rounds until the window is closed, but must remember the historical record of how many times each player won. All right, so there's, like I said, there's 5 bullet points there. So I'm going to move this off screen, and then we'll come over here into, like I said, Illustrator. And again, I'm only using this just because it's the easiest tool that I've got that illustrates the CRC card thing, while also being something that I can easily show in a video. I'm not suggesting people go buy Adobe Illustrator or use Inkscape for this. I don't think that's helpful or relevant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to this mode that's a artboard tool. So I'm just going to give myself a little kind of desk space here. Normally I would just clear off some desk space for this. I'm going to pull that rock, paper, scissors, and I'm just going to switch back to editing mode, and I'm going to take this card and I'm going to duplicate it. All right, so now we got a card. So let's look through this. So 2 human players compete against each other. To me, just seeing that, it's pretty clear to me that there's this concept of a player. And just at first glance, it seems like it makes sense to have a player class. Now we don't. So this is the class name for probably deserves a refresher. CRC card has 3 things on it. It has the first C is the class name. The R is the responsibilities, and these should be, as this thing says here, these should be short verb phrases. If it names what the thing should do, and then the last C is collaborator, or it's the other classes that this thing might have to interact with. So that's a CRC card. Like I said, usually it's on like a 3x5 card. You write the class name big at the top, and then you divide it down the middle somehow, and write the responsibilities on one side and the helper classes, the things that it needs to do its job. So if we're going to make a player class, this thing, 2 human players compete against each other. I'm not sure what responsibility that implies yet. Maybe none. And so maybe that means I'm a little ahead of where I should be. And then responsive collaborators, we have none of those yet. So this is, I think this right here I think summarizes where we're at after the first bullet point, though I don't think it's unreasonable to say. So sometimes with CRC cards, people will make one card per class, and sometimes people will make one card per object. And either of those approaches could work. I think this time I'm actually going to make one per object. So we're expecting there to be two instances of the player class, one per player. So I'm going to just duplicate this here. Give this a little bit of flavor by a slight rotation. So I've got two player classes now. So if I were in code right now and I were making this, I would just have it, public class player, curly brace, open curly, close curly. Like, I mean, that's all I'd have if to represent this in code, because it doesn't have any responsibilities, doesn't have any collaborator cards. So like, it's just that. And I think that is that represents that first item. So I think we can check that one off. Each player picks rock, paper, or scissors. So there's one thing I want to say here, and that is this notion of rock, paper, or scissors is an enumeration. In my mind, that is very clearly an enumeration. Here is a very specific small list of of choices. So there would be a I don't know what I'd call that, a choice or a player choice enumeration. And if we wanted to, we could come make that over here. CRC cards don't necessarily work all that well with enumerations, because they don't like, their responsibility is their responsibilities listed here are just to name the choices, and their collaborators, they can't, based on their nature, they can't actually have anything that they know about. They're just an enumeration. So a lot of people won't put an enumeration on a CRC card, like in CRC cards. However, maybe we could list the choices here. Rock, paper, scissors. I don't know how often I would necessarily do that like that, but that would be a thing we could do right there. If we wanted to, like I said, I in a lot of cases I wouldn't always make a specific card for enumeration, but you could something like that if you wanted to. Yeah, so if we're going to do that, then I think we could say if I can get, I don't know if I'm going to, it might be hard to, just trying to select the text there. What I might need to do is come back up to here and make this again. All right, so the thing we're trying to do right now is each player picks rock, paper, or scissors. So that's a response. That's something that needs to happen in the software, and we've got to give that responsibility to either an existing class, or we've got to give it to a new class. I'm going to leave that there so I can actually select into that again. That was my... All right, so, but I do think, so allow the player to pick rock, paper, or scissors sounds like a good responsibility for this player class. So I'm going to tentatively assign it here to the player. So pick rock, paper, or scissors. And of course, this player back here would have the exact same responsibility. Like I said, I don't know that I would necessarily write out the collaborators and the responsibilities on every single copy of a card. I would just say there's going to be more than one, and they all look the same. That's what it means to be part of a class. That's what it means, for instance, is to be of a class, is that they all do the same thing. They all look the same. They're just different instances, different sort of copies of the same thing. All right. So that's a good start. So depending on the player's choices, a winner is determined. And it describes the rules. But so the next question here is so something needs this responsibility of determining a winner. We could give this responsibility. So that's a responsibility we need to give to some card, either one that exists already or a new one. And so we could could we give that responsibility to the player class? We definitely could. We could say pick a winner. But I think given that this spans many players, it maybe makes sense that this belongs to something higher up, something that lives up here that kind of controls the players. So I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to for me, I will almost always end up with a class that like represents the overall program, or the overall, like, the high level concept. So in this case, the thing that comes to my mind is rock, paper, and I don't like that this is all caps and you can't see. Well, I'll just put spaces in here. In code, obviously, you can't have spaces in it. My cat just sat on the keyboard. All right. So I usually will have I'm actually going to do the same thing down here. All right. So this thing is going to, so we could say this thing is going to decide winner. And so that could be a responsibility of this class. But this guy, he has to know about the player class. So he's got to know about these players. So I actually like looking through this, depending on, so this isn't very obvious from that bulleted list, but like this needs to ask the players for a choice, and then it needs to decide on a winner, or decide the outcome, I guess we could call it that. So he has to know about these players, and he also needs to decide on the outcome. Now, so that's so depending on the player's choice, a winner is determined, and we could call that determine a winner. That maybe. That responsibility maybe yeah, so that could go here. So now we have the game that knows about the players. It has perhaps a field for player one and a field for player two, or something like that. So, and then it's going to just ask them for their choice, and then make a decision on who the winner is. So, I could also say, like this, like runs the game, and as a part of that, like it'll ask the players for a choice, and it'll determine a winner, and then it will display the outcome. So we could basically throw all of that work to this rock paper scissors game. Just kind of give it all of. So that's the next bullet point number 4. The game must display who won the round. Display the outcome. So this class could do all of that stuff. Let's see. The game will keep running rounds until the window is closed, but must remember the historical record of how many times each player won and how many draws there were. So I like just kind of thinking that through. Like I would imagine there's some class out there that has an int count for player 1 wins, an int count for player 2 wins, and an int count for number of draws. That could, like, we could, like, I don't think it's horrible for this to just be, let's see, remember historical record. So we could just kind of, this guy will interact with the console window to get a choice and convert it to our enumeration, and this class will do everything else. So, and then our main method would just create a new rock, paper, scissors game and just ask it to run over and over and over again. So it'll just, it'll just, it might have a method that's like, so I'm gonna, okay. So that is a way to do it. It packs a lot into this rock, paper, scissors game. I do wonder about what if we separated some of that out, because it is a long list. I kind of feel like this, like these 3 here are potentially almost like sub points of, sorry, not that one. These 3 are almost like sub points of running the game. So I actually feel like I wonder about this, and I wonder if we pulled out that remember the historical record and put that in a separate class. So like what if we came here and made a new class and made this thing called historical record. This thing doesn't need to know about anything else. It just remembers or tracks the historical record. So it like I said, this would probably just be a class that has 3 fields, and maybe they're properties, or maybe they're actual fields, but then they have properties that allow you to, or methods that allow you to like add one to somebody. So I suppose that would mean this guy also has the kind of the secondary responsibility of, I want to actually put that down here. Allow others to add, I'll change the record. So somehow we need something else to be able to say, hey, you should, this player just won a game, so add that, remember that. And if we were to do that, then this thing definitely needs to have the historical record as a collaborator. Like this thing has to know about this. We could, like this display, we could make the display a separate thing. I don't know if I want to do that. I think it's like if we were building a game where this was like networked, if there was the rock paper scissors game running on a server and there was a UI, then I probably would separate the displaying the outcome from everything else so that it's swappable. So I can run it on the server, I can run it in the web, I can run it wherever. But in this case, I don't know. Like that's maybe overkill. So I'll just keep it simple. I think that is we're at a place where this is a potential design for this with some cards. We've basically said maybe there's 3 different classes plus an enumeration. Maybe that's good enough for this challenge. And we can move on, except, well, Yeah, all right. I think I'm gonna jump over to some code here really quick, just to sort of illustrate what this could look like. So I'm gonna actually scoot this over to the other window really quick. I'm not writing out all the code for this, but I do want to kind of illustrate what this might, just some key points of what this might look like. So obviously, um, we could do that. We have our enumeration, and we could have a public class historical record. And like I said, I would expect this to have like, I'm gonna just throw in some properties here really quick to make this simple, but like public int player one wins. So it could be that, and these can all start at 0, which is what they'll do by default. So we'll start at 0, and then we need a player class, public class player. Um, so this would have, it needs a method that looks something like this, and like it has to. I'm not gonna implement this right now. Like this is gonna be broken, but it's gonna have something like this that like gets the, let's see, what do they call that? Ask the players for a choice. Pick, yeah. So this is the method that you'll use the console window to get a choice, convert it to this player choice enumeration, and then return it. The more tricky one here is going to be, this would be something like a public class paper scissors game. So the overall game, this guy, in my mind, I think he probably has, well, these might be private, so, but he's going to have a reference to a player, two references to different player instances, player one and player two. And I mean, that maybe like, I don't like, maybe those are passed in here, but uh maybe he just creates them kind of like this. Player two equals, so now he's made two different player instances, one for each of the two players. Strictly speaking, I probably could use one instance of it. In my mind, I like it better as one instance per player, because I think it represents that player. It is that player. As far as the game is concerned, this object that's stored in here is the player. It just happens to use the console window to get it. And the reason I like having two instances of it is it allows us to do something like, hey, I don't know why it's suggesting name, but it was exactly what I was looking for. It's like we could have a name, and now we know like each of these, like, so like we could do something like because they're different instances, it allows them to have different data. So I'm gonna leave that out right this second. Um, but yeah, so like I said, two instances of the player class, um, and then he's gonna have like a something like a public void run method, and then this guy would do something like while true, so like run forever as the thing described, like player one dot get choice, player two dot get choice. I'm actually writing a whole lot more code here than I expected. Player choice. And so this needs to, so it says, let's see, determine a winner. Um, so this, like, obviously, like if we could have like a private um determine. So I'm just making another method here. So I'm not going to write the logic here, but this would either, I mean, like, we could say this will return a 1 if it's player 1, a 2 if it's player 2, or a 0 if it's a draw. So then we would just call determine winner. So that takes care of that responsibility, and then display the outcome. So we could have like, so a lot of the times these responsibilities that are in the list end up being methods, or maybe it's a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 closely related methods. Display outcome. So maybe that becomes a method here. So private void display winner, and this would use like console.writeLine to, depending on what it was, to say player 1 1 or player 2 1 or it was a draw. And this method has access to these players. So if we did have a name like I had at one point, then it could do that. It could use those names in displaying the outcome. So the one thing that's missing here is remembering the historical record. And so we could make another class here, public class, historical record, which again, I said this earlier, I think this is like, oh, wait, don't we already have this? I feel like I just did this. Yeah, I do. Historical record. All right. So, so like we would like, so this, the game has the historical record as a collaborator. And again, there's a lot of ways that you can get, so it needs to know about that. Like we can make a new instance of the historical record somewhere, but this guy needs to know how to hunt them down, how to find them and use them. So the easy, like there's a lot of ways to do that. The book describes a bunch of different ways to collaborate, as it describes in I think it's level 23, the object oriented design one. But so we could have like a simple way to do this that works in many scenarios but not all, is you just have a field that stores a reference to the thing that you need, and then you just like, if this guy owns it, it's okay for him to just make a new one. And so now at this point, now you can say have something like update record or update historical record. And maybe you have another private method. I'm making these private because the outside world doesn't need to actually see these. But private void update his record int winner. And then this would do something similar to this display outcome. It would just say like, if the winner was 1, then his underscore history dot, so if winner is 1, history dot player 1 wins plus plus, that kind of thing for the others as well. So obviously I'm missing several pieces of logic here, kind of on purpose. The intent wasn't to actually go make this game, but to just kind of illustrate like how you could turn this in, this design that we made in Illustrator, in CRC cards, could turn into working code. The one thing that we're missing is nothing tells this to run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up here to my main method and say new rock, paper, scissors game. Don't need that. I'm going to do that. And then just say game.run. So now this is our main method, and it's doing, in this case, it's doing nothing but making a new instance of the rock, paper, scissors game, which itself will go, make 2 players and make the historical record. And then this says run. And then this goes nuts, running over and over and over again indefinitely until somebody like force closes the application. So again, this isn't a complete implementation of all this, and then that wasn't even the intent here. Everything we've done here in Visual Studio has not been necessary. It was just an exercise to show how you could turn, this design into working code. Now, the other thing I'll say is that invariably, like no matter what you do, no matter what thinking you do in terms of making cards, and kind of thinking how can I organize these? How can I do all these different things? Inevitably, you will get to a point where um, something about your design just simply didn't work out. And for example, like the cards didn't describe that the main method's gonna do this. I just added that in, and you may run into other problems. You know, I mean, you like. Uh, Depending on what you did, you might say, "Oh, you know what? Maybe that isn't the right way to do it. Maybe I want, something else to. Maybe I need to change it. Like maybe I need to make another class, and it's okay. Like the this is okay. I'm gonna just say this. This is potentially a little bit controversial. Not that controversial, but a lot of times people think of stuff like this as the design. The reality is, and I'm not gonna. Well, hang on. All right. I looked this up really quick. There's really one essay here. This is kind of a game changer for the software world. This guy makes a very compelling point that for software, your design is not this stuff. It is this right here. Contrasted with other engineering things where you end up with like a piece of paper, a blueprint, sketches, whatever it is, like that's your design, and then you can finally send it off to be manufactured. In the software world, the code is your literal, like this is your actual final design, and manufacturing is just a matter of compiling it. So contrasted with other engineering disciplines where where building the thing is prohibitive and you can't really just go build one, not easily, not cheaply, and so you have to do a whole bunch of design, like thinking in other in lighter weight things, using simpler tests and simpler models. With software, making the thing is trivial because you just hit compile, and a few seconds later you've got something that you can actually run the real deal on. Anyway, so ultimately, like this right here that we're seeing in front of us is the actual design. This version here is just, it's a guess. It's a, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? Because it's really easy at this level to say, oh, you know what? That's not the right name for it. This should be something else, or this should be something else. Or you know what? We're going to move this responsibility of remembering historical record. We're going to move that over to the player class, and we're going to say the player is going to keep track of how many wins it has. So now this class just goes away. It doesn't need it. This just has a number of wins, and I don't have to keep track of I don't have to keep track of player 1 wins versus player 2 wins because I'll have 2 instances of player, and they'll each just keep track of their wins. And I think that's a totally legitimate way to do it. And it's really easy in like paper or like sketched out form to just say, oh no, I'm just going to do it this way. Versus when you got a whole bunch of working code, and if you said, well, I'm going to move over to here, you have a lot more work to do. So the paper based, or like the whiteboard or whatever form for sketching stuff out, is a really simple, like it's really super flexible. It's easy to change your mind then than it is in code. But software is soft, and you can change your mind with software pretty easily too. So like that's the advantage of making stuff in software instead of making physical machines that do this stuff. Is that I said it would be harder, and I think that's true. But if we really did say, I want each player to keep track of their wins. So either something else needs to keep track of the draws, or maybe we don't even care. Maybe we don't care how many draws there were. The challenge actually does specifically say how many times each player won and how many draws there were. So technically, we need that. But maybe this guy, so now this can go away. And now in this case, update historical record. So this would just be if winner. So player 1 dot win count plus plus. All right. So anyway, the point is that software is relatively, I mean, it's easy to change, at least when compared to building bridges and buildings and airplanes. I just made that change mostly here. I mean, I don't have complete code, but that's the idea. And having said that, I have had plenty of times where I realized, oh, this shouldn't be that way. It should be this totally other way. And it took days or weeks to actually implement that change. So easy is a relative thing. And that's just life sometimes. You realize that, you know what, it would have been better a different way. All right. We are 40 minutes into this, and we've only completed one of these. I think I'm gonna keep going though for now. I may not get into this much detail on the other challenges though. Like I may not try and turn this into code, but who knows? We'll see. I may get the itch to do that. But let's move on to the next challenge. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to, let's just set all this aside in case we decide we want it. And let's move on to the next one. So the next challenge, I'll bring this back over in here. The next challenge is this game called 15 Puzzle. And I'm assuming most people have probably played this game before. The idea is you got this little, I don't even know what to call it, little thing that's got numbers on it. Sometimes it's a picture instead of a number, but there's one open slot and you can like use your fingers, your thumbs to like shift the numbers around. And the goal is to like slide, like you can slide this 2 over and that leaves a gap here. And I can slide the 4 over and now I have the gap here and I got a 4 and a 2 like that. Now I push the 1 down. So now I've got an open hole here and 1, 4, 2 down here. And so on. And the goal is to rearrange it into the solution, the official solution. So that's the basic idea. We do not have to program an answer. We don't have to get the computer to solve this. We just need to make it so a human can interact with it and try to solve it. So we don't actually have to make this work. We just need to make it so a human can interact with it. And so again, I'm going to move this off screen, so I'll just go through these really quick. Let's see. The player needs to be able to manipulate the board to arrange it. The current state of the game needs to be displayed to the user. The game needs to detect when it's been solved and tell the player they won. The game needs to be able to generate random puzzles to solve. The game needs to track and display how many moves the player has made. I hope I don't forget to cover this question because I very well might. But we'll keep that in the back of our mind. All right, so I'm going to scoot this to the side again. And let's just start thinking through this design. So it says the player needs to be able to manipulate the board to arrange it. So we got a bunch of things already going on here just from that. I do think, so it mentions player and it mentions board and it mentions rearranging it. I think though, to me, those stand out as important concepts in the game. So I'm gonna expect that I'll have a board class, and this will tracks current state of the game. I'm gonna leave it of the game out. Tracks the current state. So this knows like where the 1 is and where the 3 is and where the 13 is. I'm not sure he has any collaborators, so I'm gonna leave that off. And then I'm going to, so there again, once again, there's a player. Oops, I didn't mean to, I'm gonna duplicate, not move. There is a player. And again, this guy is going to have something like interact with humans. So this is going to use the console window in our case to interact with the human. And we didn't do this before, but in theory, you could say this has a collaborator of the console system.console. It could interact with we could say that's a collaborator. Why not? and then to manipulate it. So again, like all of a sudden, like we've this is very quickly bringing out all these things. Like, excuse me. So this knows the state. This knows what the player wants, and somehow we've got to get them to connect, right? So one thing we could do is we could rearrange these a little bit, and we could say, well, let's put the player kind of above the board, and have the player like directly control this. So we could do something like this guy knows about the board, and he also, what did they call it? Manipulate the board. Ask board to change. So I do like this, since this is the state of the board, he needs the ability to let's allows, well, yeah, so basically this is the guy who knows the state of the board. So in terms of objects, since he owns that data, of anything else that wants to change it needs to go through him. So this player has to know about if he's going to interact with it directly, he needs to be able to, to change state. So we could do it that way. The player knows about the board, and it just does that. The current state of the game needs to be displayed to the user. So we could, like, something needs to be able to display the state. Now I could imagine, given that this guy, so that's an interesting requirement. Something's got to display the state to the user. This is the thing that knows the state. So I think there's an argument that maybe the board, we could just add that as a responsibility here. Like we could just say, displays the state of the board. But the other thing is this is the thing interacting with the player. So we could, like, potentially, this is not something that goes there. Potentially it's something that goes here, where this thing displays the state of the board. Since he's already interacting with a console window, he would, and he already knows about the board, he could display that. So this could go in either of those places, and the other possibility here. And again, hopefully this shows a little bit of like how this could work. Like where does this responsibility go? What are the trade-offs to these? We're exploring different options here. Another possibility though is we could just make a separate class, and I'm going to call it board renderer. This is, I mean, given that it's the console window, there's not a whole lot going on here. So again, I don't know that I feel a real compelling need to put the console on here as a collaborator. We're not going to make a card for the console window. We could, but I'm not going to. So this board renderer, like we could just make a totally separate class that draws state of the board by request. So anytime somebody asks this guy to draw the board, he'll do it. He needs to know about the board to do that, and he of course has to interact with the console window to do it. So that's another possibility. So that's our third, like, three options that I think all have some legitimacy. We could put that responsibility on board since that's its state. Something would probably ask the board to, so we could take this responsibility and put it here. We could take it and put it here, or we could leave it here on this separate class. A lot of options. Any of them could be right. I feel like there's a fair bit involved in that drawing, so I kind of like the idea of separating it out. So something has to tell this that it's time to draw. So let's see. Either this guy, so something needs to tell the board renderer it's time to draw. So we could do something like this. ask renderer to draw, and then add in another collaborator here of board renderer. So this guy is quickly becoming kind of the hub. He knows about the board, he knows about the board renderer, and he interacts with the humans, but then he asks this guy to do stuff, and he asks this guy to do stuff. So this guy is kind of a minion of him now too. This guy kind of manages these other two. That's a possibility, though I am already starting to think, what if we... I mean, and I said this before with rock, paper, scissors. I usually end up with a class that like manages the whole game. So like, what if we had a 15 puzzle game class, and we shifted most of this like management responsibilities over to that class, and reduced the player's responsibility here to just this interacting with humans, and remove these collaborators and to get movement choice. And now this guy, he doesn't interact with the humans, but he asks player for selection, next move. So maybe we push that up a level into this like manager thing. And now he controls all of these, and now the player has just been reduced down to just changing inputs from, the console window, from whatever the human typed in to something that the rest of the game can make sense of. I kind of like that better. I think you could make an argument that at that point this is not a player, but like a player input class or something like that. Maybe I'll rename that. Which of course now means this guy should look like that. All right. How many more of these do we have? Let's see. The game needs to detect when it has been solved and tell the player they won. Okay, how do we add that functionality in here? I will say, I like the idea of, so there's a couple of responsibilities here that got added. I like the idea of this guy can check if the game is over. So he has the ability to like see if the game is over or not. We could make a separate class that knows about the board and goes through and just checks it to see if it's done or not. A win checker class or something like that. I don't know that I want to get into that. Like I like the idea of this guy just, given that question, is the game over, is so closely tied to the actual board state. I think I want to just stick that on here. So now the only thing that we need to do is something has to like check, see if the game is over. So this guy would have to ask the board if the game is over or not. Let's see. The game needs to be able to generate random puzzles to solve. So let's see. How could we squeeze that in? Now, this is a slightly tough one. Like we could make like a randomize method on here. Kind of like that. I mean, I don't think that responsibility of generating a random board makes any sense for this player input class or this board renderer class. it potentially, like, I could see this class, like, just initialize, just having that responsibility to randomize the board. So that's like, it could go, I think it could go here, or it could potentially go into another class. I think for now, like, so there's a lot of ways you could do this, but I think for right now, I am going to randomize starting state. I'm just going to stick that in here in this card. Um, and so again, like, you might be looking at that saying, well, how would I even randomize it? Right this second, that's irrelevant. We're just figuring out where that responsibility should go. What part of the code, what object should have that responsibility? Yeah. Though I will say, uh, we could just basically pick a random direction, pick a random, like, which way do I want to slide. Um, anyway, there's a lot of details that the CRC cards don't get into, um, and that's okay. Right now, we're just figuring out what are the objects that should exist and how should they interact with each other. That's what we're really trying to solve with these cards. The details of any given algorithm are something for another day. All right, so if we just slap that responsibility in here, then we are good. The game needs to track and display how many moves the player made. So that tracking the number of moves that the player has made, I feel like that's a responsibility that could go, well, it could go here. It's, I mean, because it's related to the player, but it's not really related to, well, I guess it kind of sort of is related to player input. Anyway, hopefully you can see some of these, like, design decisions. There's a lot of ways you could do it. So do we put that responsibility here? Let's see, where else can we put it? Like I said, I don't, well, in terms of, like, displaying the board, this guy probably, that might be, you're on turn 3, or it took whatever it is, like, that could be a part of this. I could see that argument. I could see the board keeping track of the number of moves it has seen. And I could also see this guy keeping track of the total number of moves. If we want to allow this to focus on just, like, what is the current state of the little tile board, then it wouldn't make sense for him to have the number of moves. This is again, this is something of a tough choice. I am gonna to make it a little more clear that there's like, this is like a run the game. Like, all of these are like subparts of running the game. So to tracks move count. Yeah. So if we add that responsibility here of tracking the moves, that's this class right here is doing a lot. But a lot of it is just comes down to the game goes in this little cycle. It asks the player for a move, it changes the state, and then we draw the state, and then we check to see if it's over. It's a loop. And in fact, as I'm thinking of that, I could call it the game loop. And actually, if that's the case, I'm going to reorder some of these. This one can quite reasonably go here. So here's the state. Here's the next move. All right. So I guess this guy feels like he's doing a lot. Mostly he's like, all of these are closely related. Like, this is his main job, is executing the game, causing the game to march forward. And a lot of this stuff he defers to these other guys to get stuff done. So he's in charge, and he has 3 minions that are each specialized into a specific thing, tracking the state of the board, drawing the board, getting input from the user, and otherwise he just runs the game. So like I said, it's kind of a long list, especially compared to these others, and we could think about maybe shifting. So like we could move this, randomize the starting state out. We could track the move count somewhere else. We talked about all those, but landed here. And like I said, in a lot of these cases, all these different variations, they're just different. They're not necessarily better or worse. They're just different, and over time you develop more of an intuition of which things are working and which things aren't working, um and you get better at which of these pathways might be successful. From right this second, though, I don't a lot of those variations we've talked about, I don't see a compelling reason why any of them wouldn't work. So platter input, plater input, player input. Okay, there we go. So there's a lot of different variations on this that can work. I think I'm gonna lock in my final answer here and say this is it. I'm debating right now whether it's worth kind of fleshing out some code like we did before. I think the answer might be yes, though. I think it's worth doing that. Just to, like I said, I'm not going to implement all the details, but just to kind of talk through how this might work in code. Um, yeah, so we'll do that later. Um, but right this second, I'm gonna wrap up this specific video, mostly because I need to move on in my day to other things. So hopefully I'll finish this up, and then hopefully we'll pick up on this one next time. Oh, actually, while we're here, there's that answer to this question. Would your design need to change if we also wanted 3x3 or 5x5 boards? At this level, I think the answer is no. This board did not dictate the size. We don't know. We don't like. We didn't determine. We didn't. This doesn't specify a size. Depending on what we did, in terms of design, that might affect how we actually turn this into code. So maybe this is a question to also revisit after we tinker with code just a little bit. But I don't see a like it like it does have some sweeping changes. If we want to support boards that are not just the 4x4, but 3x3 or 5x5, this randomizing the starting state would have to be able to account for that. This board renderer would have to be able to account for that, and the board itself would have to be able to account for that. So yeah, there are definitely some consideration. It does have an impact on things, but I think at this level, because this is so high level, I don't think that directly affects anything that we're seeing here. So that's probably the answer to that question. And like I said, I think we'll wrap up this video here, and we'll pick up the last one, the hangman one, in the next video, and maybe also just kind of tinker with some code briefly with this one too. So I think that's it for this time, and I will see you next time.